Hello and welcome to this evening's STUC Equality Hustings in the run-up to the Scottish Parliament elections. My name's Mary Senior and I'm the STUC President, and I'm really pleased to be chairing this evening's event. And I'd like to thank the STUC staff, the STUC Equality Committees and everyone joining and for submitting questions in advance. I'd also like to thank Leslie, our BSL interpreter, who's going to be here supporting the event this evening too. So I'm now going to introduce the candidates individually, and they're each going to give a 2-minute opening statement before we go into the questions that they're all going to be answering. So the first candidate that I'm really pleased to introduce is Fulton Macgregor. Fulton is representing the Scottish Nationalist Party. He's the candidate for Coatbridge and Chryston, and he's also on the Central Scotland regional list. So from the SNP, I'm going to introduce Fulton for his 2 minutes.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks very much for the invite and for the introduction. And just a wee point of clarification, it's the Scottish National Party. But I really do thank you for the introduction and for inviting me along tonight. I've been looking forward to this hustings for the past couple of weeks since I was invited. I think it's going to be a really interesting hustings, and having seen some of the themes of the questions, I think it will be something certainly for all the political parties here to get their teeth into and try to convince you who are on their party, our party, is the best way to go forward in this election. As a member in the last Scottish Parliament over the last 5 years, I sat on the Equalities and Human Rights Committee for most of that time, and it was certainly a very busy committee, so indicating that there was a lot of bills coming through that had a strong equalities focus coming through from the Scottish Government, the most recent of which I'm sure people here will be aware of, the United Nations Convention of the Human Rights of the Child. Incorporation into Scots law, an absolutely groundbreaking piece of legislation that I had the privilege of being a part of the scrutiny of through the committee work, but a bill also that brought together our Parliament and showed the best of our Parliament through a unanimous vote for it at the end, just before Parliament dissolved recently. I'm also a social worker myself to trade, so equalities is something very, very important to me personally, and it's been great and actually pleasantly surprised as an MSP to see a lot of the bills that are coming through in a justice background or a children and families background, seeing that a lot of that is also equalities led, very, very much so. And I think that, what the case I'll be making tonight is that a re-elected SNP government will continue in that vein. We've demonstrated over the last 5 years, certainly that I've been a parliamentarian, that we put equalities first. And I think that there's no better time to do so than through the COVID pandemic, which has highlighted even more so the inequalities that exist in our society. And I know that we'll be definitely talking about that tonight, but it really has shone a light on where we need to do better, and we do need to do better. There should be no party, no representative from any party standing up or sitting down as it is here today and saying that we're getting absolutely everything right. We need to do better, and I'm looking forward to the hustings to come. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks very much, Fulton. I'm now going to move to our next candidate, who is Jeremy Balfour. Jeremy is representing the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, and he's the Shadow Minister for Older People and Equalities. And Jeremy's standing on the Lothians list. So, Jeremy, pleased to welcome you here.
Hopefully you can hear me. I've got a very bad internet link, so I'll keep going for my 2 minutes. Can I say thank you very much for inviting me along this evening. It's great to be with you. Clearly, the last 14, 15 months have been really difficult for all of society, but particularly for those who are coming to employment, perhaps with other issues such as disabilities and other things like that. But many of the issues that are there were there before the pandemic. They are rooted perhaps in our society, whether that's to do with gender, to do with sexuality, or to do with your disability and other areas as well. And I think it's really important that as we seek to rebuild our economy, we rebuild jobs and security, that those who have been left behind previously are not left behind before. And so I'm looking forward to being able to answer the questions that you have. But I think the basis for me is we need to give greater credence to those who come from different backgrounds to make sure that they are not left behind. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. I'm now pleased to introduce our next candidate, who is Carol Mocken from the Scottish Labour Party. Carol is the candidate for Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley, and she's the Scottish Labour spokesperson for mental health and older people. And Carol is on the South of Scotland regional list. So if Carol's there, I'll now introduce her for her 2 minutes. So thanks, Carol.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and to all the STUC for hosting this Hustings tonight. It's always an honour to speak to comrades in the trade union movement. The trade union is where my interest in politics started, and that drive to change things and make the place a fairer one that ensures economic justice across all of our society, came from my experiences in the TUC and the STUC congresses. I think it's really important to start by acknowledging the unacceptable and stark levels of social and economic inequalities that persist in Scotland and the UK. The global pandemic has brought about an economic crisis without parallel, and it has exposed and exacerbated really Scotland's existing inequalities. And we cannot simply implement an economic recovery that merely facilitates a return to the status quo. We cannot cement women, disabled people, young people, ethnic minorities into a labour market and an economy which facilitates inequalities. In the next Parliament, Scottish Labour will put in place policies that ensure that everyone in Scotland, no matter their background, will have equal opportunity to share in Scotland's wealth. Scottish Labour will deliver a recovery that transforms the economy to recognise inequality within the labour market, and more widely will insist on targeting support to vulnerable people in society. Our job as politicians is to put people first, and that's why Scottish Labour are making this a COVID recovery parliament, talking about jobs, the NHS, education, climate change and communities. And we're talking about this in a way that changes people's lives. Social movements and the trade union movement over the last 5 years have quite rightly caused us to redefine what is meant by equality. Labour have listened and they will continue to listen, putting in place standards to have measurable impact on the economy and show social justice. We will ensure everyone in society has this opportunity to flourish economically, socially and culturally, and we'll do this through action in governance, economics and safety. Scottish Labour will put people first, and this is why we ask voters and trade unionists to give both votes to Labour. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carol. And now to move on to our next candidate, I'm really pleased to introduce from the Scottish Greens, Patrick Harvie. Patrick is the Greens co-leader and he's the spokesperson for finance, economy, fair work and equalities. So over to you. And actually I should say Patrick is the Green candidate in Kelvin and he's on the Glasgow list. So over to you, Patrick.
Thanks very much, Mary. And like everybody, can I thank the STUC and your equality committees for the invitation to speak with you tonight. There's a real frustration, though, in addressing the issues of equality, especially in employment contexts within a Scottish Parliament election, because there are real limits to what is able to be done on employment and equality. I believe very strongly that Scotland should have responsibility for both of these areas of policy, whether through independence or through further devolution. And it was a real sense of, I think, a collective failure of the political parties not to deliver devolution of those areas under the Smith Commission. But even without legislative competence on those areas, there is further action that can be taken within the existing powers that we have today. The Scottish Government, the SNP government, have made a start, I would say, with the Fair Work agenda. And there are elements of equality within that Fair Work agenda. I think they're due some credit for taking that forward and taking it to square one. But it hasn't yet got beyond square one. And there are no conditions attached to government support through grants, loans, tax breaks and the like, or through procurement. We could be attaching conditionality to all those Scottish Government actions. We need to say that the Fair Work agenda is a requirement. It's not something that we ask nicely for those good employers that want to have the good name and have the Fair Work logo on their website. That's not good enough, because trade unionists know better than anyone that we're not going to achieve the change that we need by asking nicely, but by redistributing power in our society and in our economy. The pandemic has been mentioned, of course, and it has, others have said quite rightly, exposed and enhanced the inequality, entrenched the inequality in our society. It would be a monumental failure if we came out of the pandemic in a way that made those equality issues worse. Young people, for example, are already discriminated against in terms of the living wage. If we see vaccine passports, meaning that young people are only allowed into pubs and cafes if they're the ones behind the bar pulling a pint for minimum wage, that would be a scandalous betrayal of the desire for a more equal society. So thank you very much. I'll look forward to your questions, and I hope that we can address the issues both that we might deal with the devolution of power in these areas and the issues that we can work on before then.
Thanks very much, Patrick. And now on to our final candidate for this evening. I'm pleased to introduce Caron Lindsay. And Caron's from the Scottish Liberal Democrats. She's their spokesperson for Equalities, and she's the candidate in Ulman Valley and also on the Lothians regional list. So over to you, Caron.
Okay, am I off mute?
Yeah.
Am I off mute? Can you hear?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Super, thank you. Okay, so basically Scottish Liberal Democrats are going to be talking a lot about putting the recovery first in this election. One of the things that we really strive towards is a more equal world where everyone is able to live their lives to the full. And that includes in the work environment. I mean, when I was the treasurer of the Scottish Party, I made sure that we got accredited, for example, for being a living wage employer. And I think actually it's only us in the SNP who actually have that accreditation in Scotland, which surprised me a bit. Now, we know that the impact of the pandemic did not land equally. Those who already face discrimination and inequality were often forced to bear the heaviest weight. And those in fragile employment had the least to fall back on. Women are more likely than men to work in sectors where the lockdown was most widely felt. Disabled people and people from ethnic minorities encountered disproportionate health impacts. And we also had the added impact of those with disabilities being more isolated and losing key services. And we live in a gloriously diverse world, and we're stronger because of it. All the evidence is that societies and economies are stronger when every person can contribute. And that means stopping the discrimination that rules many people out of living their lives to the full. So we need the talents of everyone to build a better future. And people from every walk of life need to be empowered so that they can offer the best versions of themselves possible. And we can't just go back to the way things were. And one of the things that I've been particularly interested in recently is to look at tackling violence against women and girls in all its forms, and that includes in the workplace. And I've called for the next Parliament to establish a commission to recommend kind of urgent steps to do that and to report within the first year. And I think we need to act very quickly on young persons' jobs, and we need to really just tackle this recovery with a needle-sharp focus on building a much more equal future for everyone.
Thanks very much, Caron, and thank you to all our candidates for their opening statements. We're now going to go to our first question, and all the candidates will each get a chance at answering the questions first as we go through. So the first question is, the STUC has long-standing policy to devolve both equality and employment law to Scotland. Are you committed to campaigning for the full devolution of equality and employment law if elected? And what are your plans to advance workers' equality with the powers we currently have? So that's our first question. And I'm going to put that question first of all to Jeremy. So first to Jeremy Balfour. When I know Jeremy's having a few problems with his internet, so we just check if he's there. Looks like he's having a few problems. Can Carol answer that question first then, please? Is Carol, if Carol Mocken's there, I'll let Caron have first go.
Hi. Are you okay? Yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you. So, yeah, I mean, I'm fully committed to ensuring that we devolve as many powers as we can to the Scottish Parliament, and would certainly be working to support that on a personal level. In terms of the Scottish Labour Party, we've made it perfectly clear that we would like to see employment law devolved, so that we can ensure that there are really high levels of employment law across the UK, and then of course into Scotland, and that we would have minimum standards in the UK, and and devolving the powers would mean that we could maximise the way in which we use these with the Scottish workforce and support people as things change with employers in Scotland. And that we have made it very clear that we want to work with the trade unions, and always want to work with the trade unions to maximise good work practices, and make sure that we can look at laws that that we can take forward in Scotland. And in the last Parliament, obviously, we had a few examples. Daniel Johnson worked hard on the protection of workers' bills, and it would be those kind of things with the trade unions that would be really important to look to. Where possible, we would wish to devolve equalities law, of course, but what we want to try and do is use existing legislation to overhaul equalities and make sure that we support people with the regulations that we have. And in particular, when you ask about what things have we done, you'll have heard the announcement that we've made about the public service equalities to make sure that we create a system that tackles inequalities in the public sector, which we do have the powers to do at the moment. I think the key thing that we talk about a lot in the Labour Party is about taking those actions, and Patrick obviously sort of referred to that, and that we have the fair work agenda in place, but we haven't actually moved to taking any actions on that. And so it's really important that we actually start to look at those things. We've put in place some suggestions around ensuring in the public sector, again, young people with disability get opportunities. We're looking to see if we can get a manifesto around women's issues and how we support that. The tie campaign, we would fully support that. These are all things that we can do at the moment and feel that we should be moving forward with.
Okay, thanks very much, Carol. I see Jeremy's back now. If I can come back to you, Jeremy. So the questions around the devolution of equality and employment law, do you agree with that? Yes. And how would you take forward, how would you advance workers' equality in Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. We were not personally convinced that this is the right moment to devolve further powers down to the Scottish Parliament. And one of the frustrations that I have had in the last 5 years as an MSP has been sitting on the Social Security Committee, where we've had powers devolved under the Smith Commission, and these haven't been implemented fully in the last 5 years. And I think there's quite a lot of powers that the Scottish Parliament already has, but we're simply either not using them or we're not using them to the full ability. And I think that is a much better way to start where we are, is to start using the powers that we have to increase people's rights. I also would be concerned that there could be differentials which might not benefit different groups if the laws were to be different between England and Wales and Scotland. So, for example, if you take the disability issue, the gap on disability is already fairly large. It's about 4%. There's 52% of disabled people employed in England. It's about 48% in Scotland. So we've got to work out why is that gap there already, and what more can we do to close that gap. And I don't think it means more powers. I think it means more action by Scottish Government, by local authorities, by companies to get these individuals into employment. So I think we need to be striving to get people into employment and make sure the employment is safe and secure, rather than necessarily taking more powers. And let's use the powers that are there already to the full ability.
Okay, thanks very much, Jeremy. I'm now going to come to Patrick, and you touched on this in your opening statement. So just hand over to you to say a bit more.
Yeah, thanks very much. I do strongly support the devolution of these powers. Ultimately, as people will know, I would like Scotland to be an independent country and to have responsibility for these powers through that route. But even if we're not independent, there is a very strong case for devolving them. I was a member of the guddle that was the Smith Commission, and I will be apologising for that whole process until my dying breath, because it was a ramshackle process. It was at a breakneck speed, and it got things wrong. Absolutely. I think one of the things that it got wrong, I argued for devolution of equality and employment law at that point, as did the SNP, but no other party supported it at that point. I'm very pleased that Labour has changed its mind on this and recognised that we can and should devolve these things, because it's not just about saying, that we want control of these things for its own purpose, as an end state. Even if you believe strongly in Scotland staying within the UK, having the ability for different parts of the UK to experiment with different ways of solving these problems of inequality in employment, trying new things, being creative, that would be one of the things that would spur on progress in other jurisdictions. If Scotland tries something and it works, and the rest of the UK copies it, fantastic. If the rest of the UK, if Wales tried something first and Scotland ends up copying it, that's fantastic too. So it's about empowering every jurisdiction within the UK to try its best. So I really do think that we need to see devolution in these areas, but that is not an excuse for inaction before devolution. And every political party right now is talking about an investment-led recovery from COVID. Well, if the state, as it must, is going to provide the investment, then that is an opportunity and a responsibility to say, here are the conditions. I want to see a recovery in hospitality, but let's set conditions for hospitality businesses to address inequality issues. I want to see investment in green infrastructure, but if the construction industry is going to take on that role because the state is providing the investment, let's set the conditions. Let's have an end to the situation where the private sector has its hands out for investment, for procurement contracts, for grants and loans, but doesn't have those conditions attached. So yes, let's devolve or get control of those powers, but let's not use that as an excuse for inaction before then.
Okay, no, thanks very much, Patrick. I'll now come to Caron for your response to the question, please. Caron, are you still there? Yeah, no, I'm not sure. Caron, are you able to respond to the question, please?
Yeah, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so Basically, we tend to default as Liberal Democrats to making decisions at the lowest practicable level. So kind of devolution of equality and employment law, was considered during the course of the Smith Commission and wasn't taken forward. Breaking up these powers has the potential to create, I think, more problems than it would actually solve, particularly in the as the UK's employment market is so interlinked, and our labour market has already suffered so much because of Brexit. I'm not sure that it needs any more problems at the moment. And I'm not sure that this would have helped, for example, when BA treated its employees so horrendously sort of last year. I mean, my instincts about this are basically that I want people across the whole UK to have the best possible employment rights. And I want care workers in Southampton to have the same brilliant employment rights as someone in Aberdeen. And that kind of solidarity, I think, amongst workers across the whole country is something that we really want to try to maintain. And going on to the Equality Act, passed at Westminster, I think that's very much proven its worth at a devolved level. And I think there are pretty significant and bold measures we can take within our existing powers to advance workers' equality. For example, we could carry out pay audits of government and local government and agencies just to provide evidence on unfair disadvantage experienced by ethnic minority and disabled employees, for example, because we know that there are huge gaps there. And kind of build on the research that the Liberal Democrats have done, just showing serious underrepresentation in senior positions in public services. We really have to do something about that.
Okay, thank you very much, Caron. And now finally to you, Fulton, to respond to this question, please.
Thanks, Mary. I mean, I don't think there's any surprise that yes, I'm fully committed to these laws, as all laws, I guess, being devolved to the Scottish Parliament. And I would just pick up on the tone of my colleague Jeremy's answer when he talked about it, and he talked about he didn't think it was the right time to, I think the words were something like pass this down to the Scottish Parliament. Now, I know Jeremy's a hard worker and a good guy. I've got absolutely no doubts about that, but I think it sort of does show where we are with this, because surely we're in a position where we need to be talking about if powers are going to be useful, if they're going to be beneficial. And I do think that Karen Lindsay raises a point here about we need to look at it in the round, if the powers can be used or if they're too connected to other ones. Now, I believe that they could be used and they should be devolved, but I think we should be having a grown-up conversation about that. And surely every single party here should be working together, as Patrick Harvie says, to get the most appropriate powers to the Scottish Parliament in order for us to have the most fair work practices we possibly can. I'm also committed to using the powers that we've got as much as possible, and even more if you look at some of our commitments just now. You've got the Young Persons Guarantee, you've got the National Transition Training Fund, both of which have been helpful to many people that I know. Many constituents have contacted me like these policies. There's been over £1 billion invested in the recovery. We've got to make sure that investment continues. We need to make it a green recovery. We need to make it a recovery with young people at the centre, and we need to make sure that it's fair and that it's equal. And we've got to take this opportunity, whatever party or parties form the next government. We need to make sure that we are on the right track. I do also in this question as well, Mary, want to touch on some of the questions, some of the comments that have come up around the college strikes just now. I think it's a very important and topical issue. And I myself, with my colleague Claire Adamson, attended one affecting the North, the colleges in Lanarkshire, New College Lanarkshire, just last week. I should say as well, my colleague Monica Lennon from the Labour Party was there as well. I want to be extremely fair that the three of us, who are the MSPs, were there. And it was a really interesting set of circumstances. I want to say that I've got complete solidarity with the lecturers in this. I think that there is a real issue here of lecturers being downgraded, to use the term, and I think that we do need to look at this. Colleges Scotland are obviously the main player in this, and one of the things that I said at that picket line was that I was committed to in a future Scottish Parliament looking at where Colleges Scotland sit in that, and should the Scottish Government actually have more control and say there. So I wanted to pick up those points as well that have came into the comments. Thanks.
Okay, no, thanks, Fulton, and thanks everyone for your comments in response to that first question. I'm now going to move to our next question, and I'm actually going to hand over to Julie Ferguson from the Disabled Workers Committee of the STUC to put her question to us. So over to Julie.
My name is Julie Ferguson. I am the chair of the STUC Disabled Workers Committee. Post-COVID-19 syndrome is a unique condition with similarities to ME and chronic fatigue syndrome. Given that it's been shown in the past year to have a long-term and adverse impact on a person's day-to-day life, it qualifies as a disability, which means we have a duty of care set out by the Equality Act 2010. How will your party establish the needs of those disabled people, and how will you support them long-term, both in treatment and in employment? And how will you utilise Scotland's new social security powers to better the lives of disabled people, and ensure they are treated with dignity and respect? Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to Julie for that question. As Jeremy missed his chance to go first last time, I'm going to come to you first this time, Jeremy. So can you give us your response to Julie's question around disabled people?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I didn't hear it all. Unfortunately, you broke up a bit, so I'm just quickly reading it at the moment. I mean, I think firstly, we have to recognise that there is an issue for people with disability getting into employment. And the issue has been there for many years. And I actually think of all the protected characteristics, perhaps disability and employment is the one much furthest behind. I'm not sure we are very good examples in the Scottish Parliament. Last time round, I was the only physically disabled who declared himself that in the Parliament. So if we have 20% of the population who have a disability, to have one is shows that we in politics still have quite a long way to go. I do think, secondly, we have to say that some of what's happened in the last 15 months could actually be of benefit to those with disability. I think the notion that you have to go to a workplace every day, which means difficulty with travelling, difficulty with getting there, and then being there can cause problems. We've shown that Zoom can work, other ways of working at home can work. And so again, as we build this recovery, I'm hoping that those who have benefited with disability from actually being able to work at home won't be forced back into the workplace. And we have to make sure in regard to that. And then thirdly, I think we have to look at what are the blockages that are causing people to get into work. And it's not to do with a disability, it's often to do with society, it's often to do with how people work. And I think there have been things, access to work fund, certainly for me, was a major thing run by DWP. And I think we need to see how those type of schemes can be more made available to show that people can go back into employment. And then the final thing I think I heard from the question was in regard to long-term COVID. And my understanding is that that has now been recognised as a condition for getting PIP and DLA, that there's been a decision that that is a disability. So again, those who have disabilities and are able to claim PIP and DLA will be able to use that to get money, and that money obviously doesn't stop them still having employment opportunities.
Okay, thanks very much, Jeremy. Now going to go to Patrick from the Green Party to answer this question, please.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, the post-COVID syndrome is an area where we're going to have to continue to be informed by ongoing research. I think it's a long-term impact that is only beginning to be understood, and so we need to be open to hearing more from the experience of health professionals, but also the experience of people who are living with the impact of that, and to learn more about it. And also, I think there's the the question of its engagement with the social security system is not just about recognising it within what I regard as inadequate existing systems of social security. It's also about ensuring that awareness of rights is increased. A whole host of social security payments have low take-up rates, and that impacts on disabled people. It impacts on many other people as well. But doing what we can to increase the take-up of social security and hopefully to automate some of the payments. We want to examine the feasibility of automatic payments within the social security system, because again, that's a way of removing the barriers that people face to accessing the payments that they have a right to. Ultimately, we want to replace a great many social security benefits with a universal basic income. And I know that there are mixed views, but a lot of enthusiasm within the trade union movement about the idea of a UBI as a way of ensuring that increasing productivity within the economy actually goes to workers, the people who generate that productivity, the people who generate that wealth, and to do away with this notion that there's a tiny number of what are called wealth creators, which are really wealth hoarders. The wealth of our economy is generated by all of us, and a UBI would be one way of demonstrating that. There is more around reviewing the existing disability entitlements within the scope of devolved social security, but increasing awareness, increasing uptake, and obviously increasing workplace organisation as a way of ensuring that employers take their responsibility seriously. These are all vital elements.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. Next to Caron, please.
Yeah, long COVID is a horrible, horrible thing. And the evidence that's kind of slowly starting to emerge about the long-term impact should be really concerning to all of us. We're talking about 1 in 7 people who test positive are still experiencing symptoms 3 months later. I have friends who are still experiencing them a year later. It's stopping people from getting on in life, but we still don't know enough about it. Layla Moran, the Liberal Democrat MP for Oxford West and Abingdon, she is the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on coronavirus. She's doing an inquiry, and she's kind of led the way in pressing for support for sufferers of long COVID in Westminster. But I think we're lagging behind a bit in Scotland. I think there's much more that we could and should be doing. The Scottish Liberal Democrats are committed to a programme of research into long COVID, and we need to think about the Equalities impact of this, because we know that it is affecting more older women. So we need to kind of focus on that and focus on kind of treatments and prevention if possible. And it's not enough for it just to be recognised as a disability so you can apply for PIP. PIP is an awful system. Part of my day job is helping people through PIP reviews, and it's awful. And I had thought 3 or 4 years ago, when I was helping people through the reviews then, that by now we would be using our social security system. And I think it was a good thing that the government worked cross-party to develop that system. But it's just so frustrating that we've built something really good, we're not using it, and we really have to get those benefits and that system into play, because it's going to make such a difference to people, for not just people who have long COVID.
Okay, thanks very much, Caron. Fulton, I'll come to you next, please.
Thanks, Mary. And like others have said, I think the long COVID question is something that I think we're going to need to really continue to learn about, as we have been over the last few months. Like Caron there, I've actually now begun to know people who have got long COVID, and I know one person in particular who's actually now had it for about a year, and it sounds absolutely dreadful. So we do need to be on top of this. We also, I suppose, there's two sides to the substantive question, which I'll come back to. But the other thing I think to be looking at treatment options for long COVID, understanding a wee bit about it. And I don't know if anybody's seen recently, there was there's some link to the vaccine actually potentially having a positive impact on long COVID. So that's been researched just now. They're not sure exactly why that is, but there was a spate and a flurry of reports from people who took the vaccine saying that their long COVID was either cured or certainly helped. So there is some science looking at that just now, and I think we need to look at a lot of other stuff, because it could be the next pandemic that follows this. But yeah, in terms of supporting people who are suffering from long COVID, I think it is right that they would be able to access PIP. But as others have said, it's a pretty dreadful benefit, and I think the more powers that we have to develop our own social security system, I think the 11 or 13% that it is at the moment just isn't enough. We need to do a bit more, because what we have demonstrated over the last 5 years and have committed to demonstrating in the next Parliament and made election pledges on is that our system will have fairness and dignity at heart, and that has got to be the way forward, because everybody who comes to me as a constituent, I'm sure everybody else here is in the exact same boat when they get people in. It's how they're treated, and I think somebody's actually put in the comments, how many hoops are people expected to jump through? It's just not acceptable to jump through any hoops, and we need to be treating people on a unique basis and individually. And sometimes that's about, yes, them accessing the benefits, but sometimes for other folk it isn't. Sometimes it's about actually wanting to be supported to continue to work or not access benefits or whatever it might be. And we need a system that is as bespoke as that actually deals with people right down to a very individual level. I'm very committed to that, and I definitely think that that's the way forward.
Okay, thanks very much, Fulton. And finally on this question, over to you, Carol from Scottish Labour.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, clearly, of course, we support anything that people who suffer from long COVID require. We must put in place. Scottish Labour are very committed to making sure we have a network of clinics to look at long COVID, the impact of long COVID, and what symptoms and recurring treatments might be needed. And so we are very committed to making sure that we get that right for people. In terms of social security, of course, it's absolutely right that people with long COVID would have access to any of those benefits. We know that it needs reformed. People have said that. We need to look at reform and dignity around receiving these kinds of benefits. And very importantly, I think we do need to acknowledge that there are things that we can do in Scotland and that we should be doing them. Of course, some of the benefits are reserved, but we can certainly put in place some of the top-ups and some of the devolved powers and use them straight away to make sure that we can get appropriate support for people. Of course, many people will be going back to work, and we have some very exciting things coming out through our manifesto about how we support people with disability to get back into the workplace, around young people with disability, as I've said before. And it's very important that we actually have action on these things and don't just talk about these things. It's very interesting, as someone who's not currently actually a politician, when you read up on a lot of these issues, actually the step that we need to take now is the action. We have all the information, we have all the research, we know what it is that we need to do. And together with the trade unions, Scottish Labour will actually move to that section of actioning these things. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Carol. I'm going to move on to our next question. And our next question is from Chris Hendry. And Chris is from the STUC's LGBT plus Workers Committee. So, Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Hendry. I'm Vice Chair of the STUC's LGBT plus Workers Committee. My question to the panel is, as continued delays to Gender Recognition Act reform have led to increasing hostility towards the wider LGBT plus community, what will your party do to improve trans rights in Scotland and defend the wider LGBT plus community from these attacks? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to come to Patrick from the Scottish Greens first for this question. So, Patrick.
Well, thank you. I'm kind of aware that as you're coming to me first, there's a real danger that I'm just going to start ranting and not stop. So, Mary, if I go on too long, please let me know. I think a lot of people probably know that I was involved in LGBT equality campaigning before I was in Parliament. I was an LGBT youth worker in Glasgow. And pretty heavily involved in the campaign to repeal Section 2A back in the first session of the Scottish Parliament. And what I remember from those days, and from my uni days in the 90s and what have you, is the level of completely normalised homophobia that people have been reminded about from things like watching It's a Sin just recently. It was chronic. It was everywhere. It was every day, and it tears my heart out to see the way that rhetoric and that prejudice is being retooled and reworked and retargeted against trans people at the moment in Scotland. It's shameful. It's not just the GRA either. Promises were made by all 5 political parties 5 years ago. I was on the hustings that the Equality Network and Stonewall Scotland and LGBT Youth Scotland ran together, where myself, Nicola Sturgeon, Kes Dugdale, Willie Rennie, Ruth Davison, all making these same promises from the political parties right across the spectrum for reform of the GRA and for recognition of non-binary people. Now, a lot of that got dumped and shelved well before the pandemic. So it's not just that the pandemic stopped this happening. Promises were broken. We need to be honest about that. But it's not just about that legislation. Here in Glasgow, there are people waiting 3 years for their first appointment for trans healthcare. Not for treatment, just for their first appointment. And then another year and a half for a follow-up appointment. And at the same time, we have had politicians, and I'm sorry I'm going to be, maybe a bit inappropriate here. I wouldn't expect anything different from the Conservatives. They voted against repeal of Section 2A. Half of them voted against equal marriage. I expect that from the Conservatives. I don't think we should expect from Labour and the SNP to have openly transphobic politicians arguing for policies which are directly incompatible with trans people's human rights, incompatible with the GRA in any form. Politicians standing up in FMQs and asking the First Minister to intervene to change prescribing law to remove trans healthcare from young people in Scotland. I think it is okay. I think people have a right to be extremely angry about the way in which this debate has been allowed to become so polarized, so toxic, and so hostile. And I know that trans and non-binary people are just bloody exhausted with it. I think we need a very clear sense of leadership from all 5 political parties that kind of open transphobia is not going to be acceptable, and that we will move on in the new session with legislative reform, but also with improvements to trans people's healthcare, and that we will challenge transphobia when we hear it in the media as well, because it's becoming all too entrenched there too. So there.
Okay, no, thank you.
Sorry, I know that went on a bit too long.
No. I'm now going to go to Caron from the Lib Dem. So, Caron.
Well, I'm not going to stop ranting. I'm just going to continue Patrick's rant, as we are pretty much in the same place on this. I've just been horrified and heartbroken and infuriated by the way that this toxic atmosphere has come around trans people. I mean, we had such a long history of feminist organisations and LGBT organisations working together in Scotland for equality for everybody. And we seem to have lost a bit of that now. And that really makes me sad, because we have got huge battles coming in terms of human rights. We need to be working together, not full of this division and utter hatred and all the stuff about trans people. It's not consequence free when people go on sort of Radio 4 or The Guardian or some huge media platform at the time just to say that they're being silenced. They're not being silenced. They've got this massive media platform, and it's trans people who are being silenced. I mean, Liberal Democrats policy, which I actually helped to bring in. I submitted the motion at our conference. Is very, very pro-trans rights. We believe that trans women are women, trans men are men, and non-binary identities are valid and should be recognised. And in fact, we've been doing lots of work in trying to get gender X passports at Westminster level. We are totally committed to trans rights. And I think, as I say, the atmosphere at the moment is not consequence free. If you're going on a platform and you're talking about spreading misinformation about trans people, you are making them more likely to be subject of attack and hate crime. And I think it's really, really important that in the next Parliament we get the GRA reform through. I mean, it's a really simple administrative change. It's about getting a birth certificate. That's it. And we just need to get on with it, and we need to do it. And way back in 20 odd years ago, as Patrick was saying on Section 2A, there was a huge kind of firestorm around about that, but it was the right thing to do, and we all have to unite to do it. And we also have to make sure that trans kids aren't waiting for ages to be seen, and trans adults are able to access the healthcare that they need quickly. And we have to bring kindness and positivity and celebrate trans people and not allow them to be demonized in the way that they have been.
Okay, thanks very much, Caron. Next, I'm going to go to Fulton from the SNP. So, Fulton.
Thanks again, Mary, and another great question, Chris. I mean, when I seen the sort of general theme of the questions earlier, this, I suppose, like every day, is the one that I had not the most dread, if that's the right word about it, and that's because, as others have already said, some of the online commentary about it, which, it's just enough to make you want to come off Twitter, really, to be frankly honest with you. It really is. It's been absolutely horrendous. I've never seen anything like it. But questions like this are good because they actually bring us back out of the Twitter world, out of the Twitter zone, and into the real world where people are affected by policies and people are affected by comments and hate online or anywhere else. I wouldn't actually disagree with the two previous speakers to any great extent. I was supportive of the GRA. As Patrick said, we stood on a platform to bring that into the last Parliament. When it was first introduced, I was supportive of it. I was supportive of it working its way through a normal legislative process. And then when there was some concerns raised about it, and it was put on hold for a further review, I was also supportive of that because I thought, well, it's an opportunity to hear other concerns, to say, well, what's going on here? But I did expect that it would have been brought back. I think that I would maybe disagree with Patrick just slightly there. Yes, it still wasn't brought out before the pandemic hit, but what the pandemic probably did is put any chance of it being brought forward in this last Parliament to an end. But I do remain supportive of it, and I do remain supportive that it should be brought forward in the next Parliament, as Caron and Patrick have both said, and folk here can be guaranteed of my commitment to that. Now, this is something that will work through any other legislative process. A bill gets put forward, it gets looked at by a committee, everybody gets to have their say on it. All the stakeholders come forward to have their say on it. The committee prepares a report. It gets debated in the chamber. It gets debated in the chamber again. Amendments come forward. It's really quite thorough. And actually, this Parliament has shown in the last 5 years that we can actually make good legislation. Yes, not everybody gets what they want, but we can make good legislation. Things come out. Compromises are found. The hate crime bill, it was a fairly good example of that. It did not end up the same bill that the Scottish Government proposed, and that was compromises, that was people working together, and that was a Parliament doing its job. The GRA would go through the same process, and I don't think attempts to just bring it down before that process even started are helpful to anybody at all. And I remain supportive. For whatever's going to be said on Twitter later tonight, I remain supportive that it comes forward again and that we move into the century that we're currently living in with this, and that people are not subjected to transphobia in the manner that we've seen.
Okay.
Again, sorry.
No, thanks very much, Fulton. I'll now go to Carol from Scottish Labour. Carol.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. I mean, can I just say from the outset that, you know, hate crime against transphobic hate crime is absolutely unacceptable. And, you know, I totally recognise this, and we talk about it in Scottish Labour, that it is a problem in communities and it has to be talked about. It can't be ignored. And I agree that it is very upsetting when the debate becomes quite toxic. And I certainly want to see that change. We need to talk, we need to speak about it, we need to talk together. So in terms of Scottish Labour's position on some of the questions that the person put forward to us is, if elected, Scottish Labour will bring gender identity clinics into line with other NHS services, and that's about making sure the referral waiting times are more acceptable. 18 weeks is a target, which, you know, is long enough. We need to look at all of these targets. We guarantee the right to self-refer to the clinics, and we want all health boards to have the same standards. We don't want different people to have to weigh different things. We would like to make sure that there is important guidance around stereotyping, and we want to make sure that it demedicalised in terms of the process, and we support education and the aims of the TIE campaign around this as well. And one of the other things I wanted to add, just when I was doing my reading and stuff, it's absolutely clear that we want to reform gender identity and bring an end to the terrible practice of conversion therapy, which is really important that we look to that as well. So it's a very important issue that I hope that we can work in the next Parliament to speak together and talk about and stop this toxicity, so that we can get to a point that everybody lives their life free from any fear of this kind of hate crime. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Carol. And finally, on this question to you, Jeremy, if you can give us your perspective, please.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. I mean, again, to start with, I think what others have said before, I mean, clearly any form of hate crime or any kind of hate is something that all of us would condemn and none of us want to see. And as someone who is physically disabled and has had to face and still faces that type of verbal abuse and that type of discrimination, I completely am concerned that no one should go through that, and we need to make sure that that is not part of what's going on in our society. I agree with Fulton, depending, you know, we will see who forms the next government in the next few weeks' time. But if legislation is brought forward, then clearly that will be scrutinised and there will be a debate. And I think I do agree also with Fulton. I mean, I think we do need to have a debate which is far less toxic and far less accusing. And I would say from all sides of the argument in regard to that. I find a lot of the comments made on Twitter when we were putting through the hate crime bill as actually hating themselves and totally unacceptable. And I think it's the prerogative of us as politicians to make sure that we have that debate in a real way. And I suppose the one issue, and I say this as somebody who was amazed when the issue was being debated maybe 2 years ago, how many people came to see me as a regional MSP. And that was, there does seem to be, and it's something I think we will have to look at, concern from women's groups around this. And I think that is where we do need to have that debate and make sure that we are being absolutely fair to everyone in society. And people like Joanne Lamont from the Labour Party has made some really powerful speeches, as have some from the SNP made some powerful speeches just around that. And I think what we have to make sure is that that voice is heard respectfully, and the appropriate debate is had around that. But I think what I would want to say is that the debate should not be toxic, and it should be done in a way that respects what people are thinking.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy, and thanks everyone for your responses to that question. I'm now going to move to our next question, which is from Fiona Steele from the STUC Women's Committee.
Hi, I'm Fiona Steele, Vice Chair of the STUC Women's Committee, and our question to you tonight is: the Scottish Government's targets to significantly reduce child poverty by 2030 were already off track before the pandemic. Poverty and inequality are set to deepen further as the full economic impacts of COVID are felt and the furlough scheme and other support packages come to an end. So firstly, will you commit tonight to the STUC Women's Committee's campaign to expand universal free school meals to all, which has been backed by all unions, poverty organisations and the government's own advisors? If not, why not? And secondly, can you tell us what your plans are to tackle child and women's poverty? Will these include a commitment from you to ensure there is a consistent approach to tackling holiday hunger in all of Scotland's local authorities, and for the Scottish Government to fully fund this? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fiona. I'm going to ask candidates if they can try and be briefer. It's a significant question, but I'm keen to fit in another 2 questions before the end. So first of all, I'm going to go to Caron for your answer, please.
Yeah, I mean, we think that, you know, education's at the heart of this recovery, and we were kind of horrified during the lockdown when it took 6 months to get laptops out to school pupils. I mean, that just was not good enough. And we know that the poorer children have been much more disadvantaged by the pandemic, and they were already disadvantaged. And we are certainly committed to ending that kind of holiday hunger. Certainly, it was our MPs at Westminster level who made a huge fuss when the Conservative government refused to commit to funding meals during the holidays. It was just awful. But you know, I think what's really important now is that one of the ways out of poverty is education. And one of the things that we have been pushing for is the pupil equity funding to close that attainment gap so that you do not have children from poorer backgrounds being more disadvantaged. And we want to make that permanent so that you don't have so many teachers on short-term contracts, and you actually make big inroads into reducing class sizes. And in terms of you know, things like childcare, we really want to kind of invigorate the childcare sector, and you really radically expand early learning provision, which will help women get back to work as well. And we note that women were, you know, more likely to be disadvantaged during the pandemic. So 7 in 10 were refused furlough, for example, to get back into, you know, at the last time the schools were closed. So we convinced the Scottish Government to expand free childcare, and we argued again and again that it's one of the most effective ways to close the attainment gap. And you know, it will help parents who, you know, have to navigate that kind of increasingly kind of complex working world. But, you know, we are absolutely committed to ending child poverty. We totally support the doubling of the child payment, but I could probably go on about this for quite some time, and I better not.
Yeah, no, thanks, Caron. So over to you, Fulton, the question that Fiona had put.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And another great question from Fiona. I think it goes to the heart of, you know, everything that MD who comes into politics stands for, because, you know, eradicating child poverty has to be all of our number one goal, in poverty everywhere. You know, it does mean that there's an inevitable part of my answer will be that we need more of the powers to do more, because obviously the systems across the UK are interlinked, and we see that, you know, the more powers that we have devolved, the more that we can do to help alleviate child poverty. But that all said, you know, we do have significant powers, and we do need to do what we can with them. And I think people would also expect me to say that. And if you look at things like one of the questions I was asked about was a commitment to free school meals, with the SNP have committed to that in manifesto for all primary age children, free school meals across the board, universal, which I think is a massive step forward. Also, in terms that does include over holiday periods, which we've seen happening even during the pandemic there. Well, I say there, obviously it's still going on, but it has been happening over at least the last couple of years. And if you look at somewhere like North Lanarkshire Council, and albeit that's a Labour run, I have no problem sharing the successes of other parties here when it's all very positive and we're all working together, because I think it was cross-party supported. North Lanarkshire Council have actually got a really good programme of Club 365, where there is meals available for children and young people every day. And I think what we need to do is we need to do more work across parties, across politicians and across society to break down any stigma that might be associated with going and getting those meals. And perhaps that could then be linked into other things like sports activities or whatever else. And I've seen that the SFA, for example, today are asking politicians to sign up to their manifesto, which includes free access to football, and that being part of also having access to food. So there's loads of different ways we could perhaps be even a wee bit more inventive around that. And of course, going into an election is a perfect time to have the imagination lights fully on. In terms of what the Scottish Government have done, people know that the Scottish Child Payment was hailed as a game changer. I know that from the work I've done with local groups in my constituency, like Cool School Uniforms, for example, that they have found that has been a massive impact on some of the children and young people and families that they've been working with. And we've pledged to double that as well, getting into the new parliamentary term. So again, another example of what we can do. They might seem small differences, but they can be big differences to individuals and families. And just another example of what we can do with more powers. But certainly there's more to do. And Caron talked there about the childcare issue. Absolutely massive. We need to make sure that we're delivering the 1140 hours across the board. We need to make sure that we're supporting women particularly to get back into work. And I think one of the main ways we can do that is also through a better shared parental leave scheme. As a dad of two young ones myself, and a third on the way, I know myself that it's not a particularly good system. I've fought for changes to this within my own party, at party conference, and within the parliamentary chamber. A lot of the rules and laws are reserved for the Westminster, and we need to make sure that we can do more here, because if we can make sure that there's more shared care in those earlier stages, that could also be very beneficial for women, instead of this sort of feeling that it's always a woman's job to look after the kids in the family home, which just is something we really need to move away from. But I mean, that's for short answers, but I think this is one that we could all speak for about 20 minutes on, and it really is. It should be most of our passions at some level anyway. But I'll leave it there just now, Mary.
Thanks, Fulton. I'll go to Carol next, please.
Okay, thank you. I will try to be brief, but it is absolutely and utterly what has to be a number one priority, and certainly is for myself and many people in the Scottish Labour Party. Can I just say that on a personal level, yes, I would absolutely back universal free school meals. I believe it would make a huge difference to young people, to their learning, to their families, and it is absolutely right as a society that we should commit to that. So it's not something that I find difficult to speak about. I want to just highlight the excellent work in North Ayrshire Council, which is a Labour-run council who have done amazing work on holiday hunger. They have worked very hard to make sure that everybody across the holiday season, all the school holidays, have access to good, nourishing food in a way that makes them feel included and is valued. So it's really important that we work on that. In terms of the plans to tackle child poverty, I mean, the statistics are just so clear. There is we just need action we need action. That is what we need. And Scottish Labour and the trade union movement are the people that should be moving on this. We should be taking action to look at using the devolved powers that we have. We should be taking action on the child cap, on increasing payments for children, for making sure that young people have access to everything that is available under any of the different systems. And you know, in terms of when I was researching for this particular hustings, the key thing to me is we know what we need to do. What we need to do is do it. And that is my commitment, certainly on child poverty. It cannot wait. By the end of the next Parliament, we should be able to say we have moved this on, and less children are living in poverty in Scotland, and we aim for no children to be living in poverty in Scotland. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Carol. On to Jeremy, please.
Hi, Mary. Yeah, I lost my link there, so I haven't actually heard what other people said. So if I repeat what others have said, I apologise now. I mean, clearly, this is a key issue. I've been happy to work with one of the secondary schools here in Edinburgh over the last
I'm sorry, I think we've lost Jeremy's link again. So I'm going to move on to you, Patrick, please. Give you the chance to answer this question.
Sure, thanks very much, Mary. The answer to the first part of the question is a very simple yes. We certainly back the expansion of free school meals to all, including measures to tackle holiday hunger. And in the most recent budget process, we said to the government it wasn't good enough just to say, let's leave that till election campaigns and manifestos are launched. Let's wait till the next government. So we've ensured that policy for primary age school pupils has been greenlit already. So that's already been achieved. We were also very focused in that budget on supporting household incomes for the most vulnerable. That's through the pandemic relief payments for the lowest income households. That's through also reducing costs, because poverty and inequality is about incomes, but it's also about costs. So free public transport, free bus travel for young people, that's up to the age of 21 and including. So it's not just young adults, but it'll be families with children who are saving money from that. We need a proper system of rent controls. We need to be making sure that people are paying less for their energy bills by cutting energy waste. There's a whole host of ways that we can do that. We want to make sure that the gender and economic recovery principles that have been published by Engender and Close the Gap are brought into the heart of the government's economic recovery plan, to look at every aspect of how we're designing an economic recovery in accordance with those principles. But finally, just on wider plans on poverty and inequality, we absolutely need to address this in multiple ways. It means things like control of employment laws so that poverty wages are outlawed and a real living wage is the minimum wage for all workers. It means driving up working conditions and ensuring that workers have a stronger negotiating hand when they're bargaining for their wages as well. And a UBI, again, would achieve that. It would strengthen the negotiating hand of workers. We need to make sure that we're using taxes fairly to redistribute wealth from those who hoard it to those who create it, the workforce in our economy. Fair taxes are a part of that. And also changing patterns of ownership. If more of the workforce own a share of the businesses that they're working in, then we're going to achieve greater equality as well. And finally, on social security, over decades since the 1980s, successive UK governments have turned the social security system from something that deserves to be called that into a system that is designed to bully people into low-paid work and then subsidise that low-paid work so that employers don't have to take responsibility for giving people a decent, livable income. So your successive UK governments, whether Labour, Coalition or Tory, all bear responsibility for having done that. We need to remake and re-win the argument for a social security system that is worthy of the name, that is actually about ensuring everybody's well-being.
Thanks very much, Patrick. And I think Jeremy's back with us. So, Jeremy, can you tell us whether you would support the STUC's Women's Committee's campaign on universal free school meals and on tackling child poverty and women's poverty, please? Actually, I'm not convinced that Jeremy is. Jeremy, can you hear us? No. I'm sorry, I don't think Jeremy is picking up our question. So I think we should go to the next question, which is from Kajia Mohammed from the STUC Black Workers Committee. So I'll go to that question, please.
Hello, my name is Khadija Mohammed. I'm a senior lecturer within the School of Education and Social Sciences at UWS, but I'm also a member of the STUC Black Workers Committee. And the question we would like to put to the panel for this hustings is that you will have noted in the media last year that the STUC Black Workers Committee launched its Break the Race Ceiling campaign. It really calls for strong action to address the institutional racism and the real lack of awareness of race equality issues that block the recruitment, retention and promotion of Black and minority ethnic colleagues across Scotland in different workforces. And we have statistical information, we also have anecdotal narratives that support a lot of these discussions. We're clear that our campaign seeks to acknowledge the issues and review current practices in workplaces. We need to consider how do BME colleagues already exist in the workforce in order to attract new recruitment. So firstly, we'll need to address the obstacles, the challenges that they face. And that's ranging from the day-to-day microaggressions they experience in the workplace to the lack of promotion opportunities. And so what we're really interested in is asking you if you could outline what specific actions you would take if elected into government to ensure that Black and minority ethnic colleagues are supported along that trajectory of recruitment, of retention and promotion. Thank you.
So thanks. So this time I'm going to go to Fulton first for that question from the Black Workers Committee.
Thanks, Mary, and again another fantastic and relevant question. During the last 5 years of the Scottish Parliament, I've sat on the Equalities Committee, as I said, and I've also chaired the Racial Equality Cross-Party Group within the Parliament. And the one thing that I found time and time again is just how much of a problem this is. And I think, being a white male, I think sometimes we just don't get how big a problem it is until it is really spelled out to us. And I want to give 2 examples of how it's been spelled out to me. And I've been quickly looking at my phone, so please forgive me for that, just to make sure I've got the right information up. When I was chairing the cross-party group a couple of years back, some members here who are online will probably know about Close the Gaps research. And their research, their headline research, was finding that 3/4 of BME women were experiencing racism, discrimination and bias at work. Now, I wouldn't have the time here to go through that research, but I would encourage my fellow candidates to certainly look it up, and anybody else who's interested, because it really was quite striking. It's this particular cross-party group session that's always sat with me and struck me about just how much experience the BME women face, because they've almost got the double barriers. And one of the other examples I want to give, and these are only 2 examples out of absolutely numerous examples that I could have picked from, was in the Equalities Human Rights Committee. We actually done an inquiry on employability, and what we found was that institutional racism is such a big factor. But what we also found, I will not name any organisations, local authorities or public bodies, I will not do that here, but what we found quite consistently was organisation after organisation telling us that institutional racism is a problem, but not for them. Now, if everybody's telling you almost the same thing, that institutional racism is a problem, but not for them, then who actually has the problem? And that it was very striking, and we made some quite clear demands of government and of Parliament and of various bodies about how we address this problem going forward. I remain very committed to this. That's why I took on chairs of the groups, the cross-party group, as I said. I've been on the Equalities Committee as well. But I do think that we do need to do more. All political parties need to do more. All governments need to do more. What I would say for my own party in the government is the SNP did bring forward the Race Equality Framework and Action Plan, which is reviewed every year. We also in the cross-party group got regular updates on that. Is it working enough? Well, it's a plan to 2030. I think probably what it needs to do is it needs to be speeded up in order to tackle some of the issues that have been highlighted through the committee's report that I referred to, but also knowledge and understanding that's coming forward through the pandemic and how that is made further inequalities even more apparent, as I think others have said. Yeah, I do think we do need to do more. I think there'll be a commitment to do more. Around employment specifically, the action plan does say minority ethnic people have equal, fair and proportionate access to employment and representation at all levels, grade and occupation types in Scotland's workforce, and experience full labour market, workplace and income inequalities. That's the goal. Until we're there, we've not reached that, and we all need to fight for that. That's the government's goal. So there's nothing wrong with saying that. That's the government's goal that all parties have signed up to within the Scottish Parliament to one extent or another, and we need to make sure that we reach that goal. And I'm certainly committed to doing that. I think this is a major issue, and I think this should be definitely a major issue of the next Scottish Parliament term.
Okay, thanks very much, Fulton. Now I'm going to come to Jeremy, because I know you were having difficulty hearing us, but hopefully you saw the question, and we'd really like to hear your response, please.
Yeah, thank you, and apologies for my internet access. It just seems to be very poor this evening. Yeah, I mean, I heard a bit of what Fulton said, and actually I agree with a lot of what Fulton has said on this. I do think it's something we need a cross-party working together on. I think the Scottish Government did bring forward this action plan, which I think was welcomed by all parties. But I think we have to keep on top of this issue, and we have to keep reviewing it. 2030 isn't that far away now, and I think there's a long way to go on this. As someone again who has come into employment through a different protected category without disability, I'm not looking for any favours, but I am looking for a plain, open field which treats everybody the same. And I think we don't have that here in Scotland yet. And that is a societal thing. I think we have to recognise that as a societal thing. And I think we need to challenge it when we see it. And I think as politicians across the board, we need to do that. And I think we need to make sure that people are getting the opportunities, whether that is at school, to be able to achieve all that they can, and then work out a pathway for them individually, which is best into employment. But I think there's a long way to go on this. I think it's something we cannot be proud of so far in regard to Scotland. And I do hope that whoever forms the next government and whoever forms the next parliament collectively, that this issue will be taken forward, and that we can challenge stereotypes, and that we can look for opportunities to promote different ways for people into apprenticeships, into college, university, and then into different types of employment as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Jeremy. Carol, over to you next, please.
Great, thank you. I mean, the statistics on this are absolutely shocking, and in particular, this reading around this was clear that it is action that is required. And in actual fact, the Break the Race Ceiling campaign, when it came through the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sarwar, was one of the signatories to that. So we very much support the campaign. I want to start by saying that I think that as a party, we need to look at Black and ethnic minority people in public life. Do we have councillors? Do we have MPs? Do we have MSPs? It's extremely important that we lead by example in this. And so all of the parties, I'm sure, could do more to ensure that we get this right. In terms of what we actually actively going to do just to try and make sure I make best use of time, when our manifesto comes out, you will see areas around the way in which we look at the statistics of recruitment for this group. We intend to make sure that in the public sector, we are having absolute dialogue with directors, chief executives about how we action any of these points when people come into the workforce, how they come in, how they progress through the workforce, which is incredibly important as well. It's not just about getting people into employment, it's that they have the same chances as everyone else to get through these organisations. And when we were looking at our commitments, we looked at the Coalition for Racial Equality and their manifesto, and they have 10 action points, which we are taking extremely seriously. And we hope that that will contribute to how we make sure that we get on top of this and that people see themselves as able to make it in the workforce the same as anyone else. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Carol. I'll next go to Patrick to respond to Khadijah's question on supporting Black workers.
Thanks very much. I mean, I would want to echo actually a lot of what Carol just spoke about, and I hope that a lot of us across the parties are on the same page on a lot of those issues. We do know a lot about this issue, about this phenomenon, but I think there are aspects we don't know as well. I think there are aspects of the information that do need to be gathered. In particular, Fulton mentioned some of those institutions that say, institutional racism is a problem, but not for us. We're not necessarily getting from them a clear picture. And so I think in particular, the interaction between Black and minority ethnic communities, economic participation, health impacts and access to services, we need a fuller picture of that. But the last thing I wanted to say is about this phrase, and I was glad Khadijah used the phrase in the question, and Fulton responded well to it as well, the phrase institutional racism, because we are at a point now where we have a UK government that is deliberately trying to seek out academics who have denied the existence of institutional racism and asking them to define the problem. And surprise, surprise, they produce a report saying it's not a problem. And at the same time, the same UK government that seems more concerned with protecting statues of dead white supremacists than with protecting the right to protest against racism and inequality. So while there is that contradiction between what we all say we're trying to achieve and the signals being so strongly sent by a UK government which also continues deeply racist immigration and asylum policies, I think we have a profound problem. And I hope that the next session of the Scottish Parliament will be able to give a very strong rebuttal to that whitewash of a report on institutional racism in the way that we conduct ourselves on these issues.
Okay, thanks very much, Patrick. And finally on this question to Caron. You're on mute, Caron.
Sorry. I think that the structural racism that is across so much of our society, it's time we really tackled this. One of the things that the Scottish Liberal Democrats did a couple of interesting items of research. Scotland is far from being immune to institutional and systemic inequality, as we've seen. Our research found that there were over 2,200 racist incidents in schools being reported in a 3-year period. And we also found evidence of catastrophically low rates of representation in senior public services. For example, only 1% of the top policing jobs were held by those from an ethnic minority background. That is just not good enough. So we really need to go through our public services, government agencies with a fine-tooth comb. We need to do a proper audit. We need to look at career advancement. We need to look at pay gaps. But also we need to start early. We need to start in schools to tackle racism. In Wales, Kirsty Williams, who is the Liberal Democrat Education Minister, she's just accepted 51 recommendations of a new report, which advise on the teaching of themes and experiences relating to ethnic minority communities. And it basically it concluded that education alone can't put right the systems. But schools are a significant area of change and critical to building that sort of the informed citizens of the future who will not, have anything to do with, and that will kind of break down those barriers. So that's really what I wanted to add into this. But I mean, a friend of mine, and she is by far from the only person to experience this. If she puts in a job application with her married name, she's likely to get an interview. If she puts a job application in with her maiden name, she is exactly the same application. She is not. And so one of the things that we have had as policy for years is name blind recruitment processes, which actually I think is something that we really should be looking at taking forward as best practice.
Hi, Mary's left the call. I don't think she'll come back soon. But thanks for that, Caron. We'll just go on to the final question, which is from the STUC Youth Committee, and it's Stella Rooney. So here's the question.
My name is Stella Rooney, and I'm a member of the STUC Youth Committee. COVID has plunged many young people into unemployment, but it has also increased the already very high number of young people on 0 hours or other forms of precarious employment. Precarious employment leads to increased levels of poverty for many young people. It also increases to uncertainty and stress, not knowing how much you're going to earn on a weekly or monthly basis. I'd like to ask you what you and your party will do to fight back against exploitative employment practices, and what you will do to actively build towards a more secure future for young workers in Scotland. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm now going to go to Fulton to answer this question first, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks a lot, Mary. And again, another good question. The pandemic has very much highlighted that the inequalities, as we've already spoke about, and I think young people are the front of that in a lot of ways, and we can look at it in a number of ways. Young people have borne the brunt of many of the restrictions, and if you look at the college and university situations, for example, and they're bearing the brunt of employment as well. I've had a number of constituents come to me, quite a shocking number actually, who were in insecure employment, and that just stopped. And when the pandemic hit, and they did not have the same rights and guarantees as other people who weren't on those type of contracts. So yeah, there's definitely more to be done there. We need to make sure that that we're doing more. The SNP have obviously committed, as I said earlier, to the young person's guarantee. We're committed to all young people under the age of 25 having employment, having secure employment moving forward. This is a massive part of our manifesto pledge going into the next term of Parliament. We need young people to be a major part of our recovery from COVID, the recovery that needs to be fair, a just, and a green recovery. And you know, the essence of your question is very much spot on. And I, for one, in my party, are very much committed to young people. I actually don't think you'll hear any of my colleagues here from other parties saying anything different on this. But I know what you need to see is action. And I think that, you know, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's, you know, our young people have sacrificed so much over the last year, and now it's time to really give back to them and make sure that there is good jobs available, secure jobs available, and well-paid jobs available for them.
Thanks very much, Fulton. I'm now going to go to Carol for your response to Stella's question, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, can I be absolutely clear that I'm absolutely opposed to precarious work practices, and Scottish Labour feel that we've not deployed the full range of sort of ambitions and you know, and powers that we could have. And so we want to go further. We want to work with the trade unions, Unison, Unite, USDO and others who have charters in this area, and how we can actually bring about better employment for young people. And AS announced yesterday, as you probably know, that we would ban 0-hour contracts in public sector procurement, and we would go much further as best we can. And we certainly would be campaigning to get rid of 0-hour contracts. We would pay the living wage in all procurement that we were doing. And I think this week has shown that the Scottish Labour Party are taking jobs, and jobs, you know, high quality jobs that give people proper employment with good terms and conditions. We're taking that very seriously. We've announced funds for training for young people, for young disabled people. We've looked at apprenticeships, how we're going to put that. We've looked at how we respond to job losses after the COVID pandemic. And these things are a start on how we have to work forward. And on a personal level, I think what we should be doing in Scottish Labour is taking these and working with the trade unions to get the best outcomes that we possibly can for young people in the workforce. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carol. I'll now move to Patrick, please, for your response to Stella's question.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I mean, very clearly COVID has had the most severe health impact on older age groups, but the most severe economic impact on younger age groups. And, you know, that's against a backdrop of existing entrenched age discrimination in areas like the living wage, for example, the minimum wage, where you have a scam living wage, a fake living wage introduced by the UK government, which only applies, it's not a real living wage, it only applies to older age groups. We think there should be no discrimination by age in the minimum wage, and it should be a real living wage for everybody. I think somebody earlier suggested my party doesn't pay the living wage. I'm happy to clarify that we do. We're fully committed to the living wage in practice as well as in principle. But we need to yes, absolutely challenge unfair practices, and hopefully with control of employment law in future, we'll be able to do that more effectively. But the role of public procurement also can make clear that we're not going to tolerate these kind of abusive practices in the wider economy. I think a couple of the comments in the chat box earlier highlighted the fact that even in public services funded by public money, like further education, some of these abusive and insecure employment practices are still common in Scotland, and we need to be taking responsibility for that. I think, just finally, this is, as I said earlier, about poverty more generally. It's about incomes, but it's also about costs. And many of those same young workers who are living with precarious incomes are also living with precarious and exploitative housing conditions, because all they have available to them is the private rented sector, and sharp practice and exploitative practice is still all too common there. So we need to be looking at the economic situation of younger people in the round. Employment is a big part of it, but so is the situation that they face in terms of housing.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. Finally, on to Caron for your response, please.
Yeah, there's absolutely no way we can let this whole generation of young people down. We absolutely have to support them. The youth unemployment is going through the roof. So one of the things that we would do is kind of young people's guarantee. We'd give them also make retraining available when it was necessary. But also, one of the things that we saw during the pandemic was, for example, if you have had a student who was working in a restaurant and all of a sudden they for some reason couldn't be put on furlough, they ended up with absolutely nothing because they couldn't then claim benefits because they were a student. So something like what we want to do is make sure that we adopt some form of universal basic income to provide that safety net that that is so clearly needed. And one of the other things that I think will do to help young people get ahead in education is actually provide more childcare, because at the moment it's only it's only provided when the actual lectures are on. So we would extend that to kind of when people are out on placement and things like that as well. But I think we need to make sure that
I think
sorry,
you just missed that, Caron. No, you're back.
Yeah, we need to make sure that young people have the opportunities to go for good jobs with good employment practices.
Okay, no, thanks everybody, and thanks for people watching and for bearing with us with some of the technical glitches that we've had this evening. We've ran on a bit, but I think that's because we've had some really good quality debate and some excellent questions that have been put to us today. So in closing, I'd like to thank the STUC Equality Committees and the STUC staff for facilitating this event. I'd very much like to thank all of the candidates that have been here and responded to our questions today. So that's Fulton Macgregor from the Scottish National Party, Jeremy Balfour from the Scottish Conservative Party, and again, Jeremy's obviously had some challenges with his Wi-Fi this evening, Carol Mocken from the Scottish Labour Party, Patrick Harvie from the Scottish Greens, and Caron Lindsay from the Scottish Liberal Democrats. Thank you all for responding to our questions, and thanks too for the comments that people have been posting on Facebook and Twitter. I think it's really contributed to the lively debate that we've had here. In closing, there's two final things that I would like to say. First of all, it's to remind everybody to sign up to the STUC Women's Committee's Free School Meals campaign. Please sign the petition. But most importantly, it's to use your vote on the 6th of May. Please ensure that everyone goes out and participates in this democratic exercise. It's so important that all workers exercise their right to vote, that we can then participate in the Scottish Holyrood election. So thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Thanks to the candidates, and have a good evening.